Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we are going to be talking about the next installment of Spawn with Spawn number 14. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in September of 1993, here on the cover we see a very cool image featuring the Violator in both his demon and clown form, as he is the main focus of this issue and kind of making his return. We haven't seen the Violator show up in a few issues, so, this is kind of getting back into the mainline story and kind of expanding upon the universe and not focusing solely just on the trials and tribulations of Al Simmons. Story and art, Todd McFarlane. Letters and editor, Tom Orzechowski. Color, Steve Oliff, Ruben Rude, and Ollie Optics. Here on the first page of the book, we get a full-page splash portrait of the Violator in his clown form. You may recall that after his fight with Spawn, Mabalja punished the Violator for going against his will by locking him in his clown form and taking away his ability to transform into his demon form. Violator is talking to some people off page as he tells them that he works for a guy that's just terrible and really tough and really a huge ball buster, as he's speaking about Mabalja, but also states that his boss has a guy who he uses for his toughest assignments because he's so powerful and so strong and, so reliable and is always the person who can get things done. And then says, guess who that person was? It's me, none other than the humble little old Violator. However, when we move to the next page, we see that Violator is trying to regale a group of kids that are just hanging out in the alleyway, and none of them seem to be all that intrigued by the epic tale that he's planning on trying to tell them. He maintains that it's amazing and that his exploits are legendary, but they all seem to feel like he's just kind of pulling their leg and is completely full of crap. And given the fact that Violator is in fact a demon, they're probably somewhat in the right in not trusting the things that he's saying to them. However, they of course don't realize it at this point that he is an agent of hell. He continues to tell them that this story is like nothing they'll have ever heard in their lives, and that, they should definitely listen to realize his true greatness. However, they're again unimpressed by anything he's saying. And he realizes that in order to keep their attention, he's going to have to sweeten the deal, as it were, as he reaches into his pocket, pulls out a huge wad of cash, and throws it into the boys' faces. Two of them seem to be very excited by this and tell him to go ahead with his story, whereas the third one seems to question what his motives are and wonders if the money's even real. However, his two friends tell him to just shut up and listen because they want to get their hands on this cash. After realizing that he now has the boys' full attention, Violator begins to speak of a tale of old happening 800 years ago, in which the horrible antagonist is none other than an evil Spawn wizard, aka Medieval Spawn, we see pictured right here, with his ridiculous metal shard that is supposed to be a sword. I don't know why this was such a thing that was going on in the early days of Image, where every blade had to just be this jagged piece of airplane wreckage. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, I guess if you're going for the whole edgelord aesthetic, you may as well go wild with it, but I don't know. I just feel like it would have been better served to have a more realistic blade, but that's just my personal opinion. Violator goes on to talk about how this wizard was terrorizing the land and how he ruled through just intimidation and fear and was just going around and, killing people at will and just was an absolute terror. However, we do see that while Violator is spinning the narrative that the medieval Spawn was this horrible, evil wizard, he was in fact actually a protector of the people of his land, and we see that they were actually celebrating him as he moved through their village. Oddly enough, despite this sword being such a weird and strange shape, the scabbard that it goes in seems to be perfectly normal. I don't know if Todd just wasn't paying attention when he drew that, but I found it a little funny. Violator goes on to tell how the evil Spawn wizard would sit back and watch as different armies did battle, just reveling in the death and destruction, when in actuality he was protecting the people of his land from an invading army, stating here that they would not do any harm to the people of this land as long as he lived. Once again, the Violator spinning a lot of lies to the kids, which, of course, he's a demon, so that's par for the course. The boys then ask Violator why it was that nobody stood up to the evil wizard and took him out, when Violator then tells them that there was someone who did stand up to him, as he himself was appointed by his boss to go and take care of the evil wizard. However, we can see that while Violator was depicting himself as the benevolent hero who had the adoration of all of the villagers and townspeople throughout the land for being their savior, in actuality, he was up to the same hijinks back in the Middle Ages as he was in the early days, or in the early issues of this comic book, going around terrorizing people, ripping their hearts out, eating those hearts, just ransacking entire villages, wiping out the populations. And when he finally found someone who knew the location of Spawn, he tortured him until he gave him the information and then killed him, despite the fact that he has told the boys that this man sought out him to give him the information to go and fight the evil wizard and protect them, when, this of course is just a complete fabrication of the actual events. It's literally just Violator trying to paint himself as this amazing hero who was out on the prowl to defeat an evil that was terrorizing the land. As the Violator continues to weave the story about his exploits in the Middle Ages, stating that he planned on luring the Spawn wizard to fight him by kidnapping his evil witch mother and using her as bait, the kids then interject, stating that a lot of his story doesn't seem to add up. Mostly the fact that he's claiming to be 800 years old and that he had all this amazing power, which seems odd considering he's this tiny little fat clown guy. Violator then asks them that if they've ever heard of the Bible, and stating that, that's how all of this is possible. The kids then are pretty surprised and believe that he's actually an agent of heaven, and he very quickly corrects them, stating that he is actually an agent of hell, which seems odd considering the fact that he's trying to portray himself as this virtuous hero in his story, but is, incredibly quick to point out that he's working for the devil. It seems counterintuitive, but, the kids don't seem to be that surprised or even really caught off guard by it. Meanwhile, in another part of New York City, notably the 12th precinct, we see that detectives Sam and Twitch are celebrating as they are finally cleared of any wrongdoing in the death of Billy Kincaid. Interestingly enough, only 2 weeks of time have passed in the story since issue 5, where Billy died, and issue 14, where we currently are. Which in actual real world time was about a year. So, Todd's moving this story along at considerably a snail's pace. Especially when you consider that he missed a few months in getting the issues out. It's really surprising to me that he was willing to, really approach the story with a slow burn mentality, especially on a brand new book. But, it worked out for him. He was the book still remains today. It's still popular today, and it was very popular at this time. So his choices were paying off. We then see that Sam and Twitch are ready to get back out on the streets, and Sam wants to go after the guy in the cape, notably Spawn, as they're pretty certain that he's the one who dropped off Billy Kincaid's body in their office, and they have some questions for him. And considering that no one else in the police precinct or the city seems to really know of his existence, they believe that they're going to be the first ones to really blow the lid off of the case that no one else seems to even know is a case in the first place. Meanwhile, in Hell's Kitchen, we see that Spawn has returned from Africa after fighting Chapel, and that he is just kind of sulking in the alley, actually rather angry with himself at the fact that he's given up the biggest ace in his pocket, notably that everyone in the world believed that he, as Al Simmons, was dead and gone, and he's basically blown his cover by revealing himself to Chapel. And also the fact he's down a considerable amount of power now that he used to teleport he and Chapel to another continent. As we see, his power level is currently at 7,754. He's really just kind of beating himself up, upset that he allowed his anger to get the better of him as he starts to wander through the alleyways, contemplating what his next move should be, really hoping that Chapel doesn't bring attention to the fact that he's still alive, or I should say back from the dead, and just kind of trying to figure out what he's going to do from going forward, not really sure what his next move should be, and just kind of at a loss for, what his plans are moving forward. We then see that detectives Sam and Twitch are driving into the alleys to try and hunt down the mysterious red-caped figure that they saw before, believing that he is absolutely living within these alleyways. They hop out of their car and start to question the other homeless men that live in the alleys with Spawn. However, the homeless men living in the alleys have a rather contentious relationship with the police, as we've seen in past issues. And they're not in any hurry to answer any of the questions being asked of them, as they basically all play dumb to not give Sam and Twitch any help in their search. Unfortunately for them, in his, thoughts and distractions, Spawn is not paying attention to any of the commotion that's been going on, as he meanders around the corner, lost in his own little world, and realizes that he's now in a position that he doesn't want to be in, as he spots the two police officers and quickly turns around and ducks back behind the corner from whence he came. However, it wasn't fast enough to avoid the gaze of Sam, who begins to step forward and give chase. However, he's cut off when one of the homeless men grabs him and states that, "Oh, I know what you're talking about. I remember seeing that guy trying to stall for time." Sam tells him to get out of the way as he and Twitch run around the corner. However, Spawn has disappeared into the darkness in the alleys, and they're once again back to square one in their search, as this man has helped Spawn, his friend, to try and cover for him and get in the way of any kind of police presence that might be trying to find him. As the sun continues to set in New York City, we then see Spawn sitting alone, sulking on the ledge of one of New York's many skyscrapers, as he continues to ponder what his next move should be, especially now that he knows the police are also on his tail. And that's when we move back to the Violator and the story that he is telling to the three boys in another part of the city, as he begins to state of how he tracked down the evil witch who was the mother of the evil Spawn wizard, Of course, this is actually a woman that the medieval spawn was deeply in love with and who he very much took care of as we see him riding off. She, of course, telling him to be careful and to return to her. He states that he will always make his way back to find his, dearest love. A very similar case to what we see happening with Al and Wanda. However, it seems that at this point, Mabalja sent back a man to be a Hellspawn very quickly, and he was able to convince the woman that he loved of who he was. Very much unlike what he did to Al, letting him stay in hell for 5 years while the rest of the world continued without him and allowing the woman that he loved to move on with her life. We then see that the woman is, saddened to see the love that she does not want to lose leave her as she occupies her time with painting in her home. Unfortunately, she is being watched by a rather nefarious character. As the Violator bursts into her home, she, of course, is terrified by this horrific monster as he grabs her and drags her off into the woods, having a messenger deliver a message on an arrow for some reason to the Hellspawn, letting him know that his beloved is in the clutches of the Violator and that if he wants her back, he's going to have to come and get her. He then confronts the Violator, basically calling him a coward for what he's done, as he wastes no time in attacking, jumping forward, striking the Violator. However, the Violator knows that he has the upper hand given that he has a hostage, so he stays close to her side, making sure that the Hellspawn can't really go full ham and use a ton of his power and potentially injure his beloved. Also, this is the point in the book where I believe that Todd was starting to get really pressed for time on cranking out these pages, as I don't know if it shows up well on camera, but the level of detail in the artwork takes a real downturn from this point forward for the rest of the book. There's, a lot of panels that don't really have super detailed backgrounds, and even the characters themselves are a lot less detailed than they were previously in this same issue. I really think this was just Todd trying to, crank these pages out and get them done so that this book could come out on time. The medieval spawn once again realizes that the Violator is basically a coward and calls him out on it, stating that, he's going to defeat him here and that he needs to make his move, as the two of them lunge at one another to do battle. Of course, back in New York, the Violator is basically portraying this entire battle as him being, this great warrior who's standing up to an unspeakable evil, and that the earth is just trembling at the clashes of their battle. However, in the reality of the story, the Violator is just, kind of going at the medieval spawn, telling him to just give it a rest. However, medieval spawn's horse attacks the Violator from behind and kicks him in the back. This, of course, starts to turn the tide of battle. Once again, Violator spinning it as he's the one who has the upper hand. Once again, completely fabricating the story to the boys in the future. We then see that Violator is picking himself up off of the ground as he, continues to taunt the medieval spawn, who is completely unintimidated by this monster. He knows that Violator is here on behalf of Mabalja, and he states that he's not going to succumb to whatever the Mabalja's plans are for him, that he's his own, entity, and that he's going to live his own way and not be just some pawn in a war that he doesn't want to be part of. He then tells the Violator to go ahead and take his best shot, as we see Violator open his mouth and projectile vomit some sort of corrosive acid fire that is an ability we were unaware that he even had up until this point. The woman who he captured obviously is terrified as she sees the one man that she loves being what she believes incinerated in front of her eyes as the blast just completely ignites him. Violator, of course, spinning it that, he was able to track down the wizard as he was trying to escape and, use this powerful attack to fry him in his armor. However, at this point, the boys seem to be relatively unimpressed with the Violator's story as he asked them what they believe he found after the attack and, what was left of this evil wizard. However, they're just like, whatever, man, like, we don't care. So Violator realizes that he's going to have to reach back into his wallet and give him some more money so that he can finish the story and get to its final climax and portray himself as the ultimate victor. And here we see on the final page of the story, the Violator standing over the armor of the medieval Spawn, grabbing his chains, smoke rising up from it, as he states that there was nothing left of the evil wizard and that he was, completely victorious, as we see him laughing maniacally, and that this story is to be continued in the next issue. On the next page, we see image info, once again, just kind of a little blurb about what's upcoming in Image Comics at this time. We then see 2 full-page splash images of Spawn drawn by other artists. This one by Wolf and Kirk, this one by Herrera. They both look pretty cool. I really like this one. It's very action-oriented. I like how dynamic the pose of Spawn jumping through the skies of New York is. I also like the whole, reaching out towards us, the reader, with the energy burst on his hand, and how everything behind it is, slightly different in its coloration as we're looking through the energy. That's a nice touch. This image also on the right, it's very unique. It's weird. It almost makes Spawn seem like some kind of druid or wizard as we see him walking out of a crypt with his hands, glowing with necro energy. His face mask off, revealing his, scarred and burnt face. It's an interesting portrayal. It's still Spawn, but it seems, very different or unique in a way that he hasn't been portrayed up until this point. On the next page, we make it to the spawning ground as we see once again different readers writing in letters with questions or observations that they've made. Most of them are pretty straightforward. However, there was one letter on this page that I found extremely interesting involving the title Shaman's Tears, which was a title that was published in the early days of Image, and how the reader was actually somewhat distraught about the fact that Shaman's Tears was going to be dropped by Image, and that it was a decision made by the 6 co-founders of Image, and it was because Shaman's Tears didn't really focus on superheroes and therefore didn't really fit into the greater Image universe that they were trying to build at the time. And mostly the reader was criticizing Todd because of his supposed friendship to the creator of Shaman's Tears. However, Todd responded that at that time, all the decisions made about the company were made by the original 6 founders in an actual vote. So, he basically said that the decision to drop that book, even if he didn't want it to be done, he had to convince at least 3 of the other people to go along with him, which he apparently couldn't do. It's just kind of funny to go back and see that, it seems like a rotten thing to do. I kind of agree with the reader that the whole premise of Image was to create a publishing company in which creators could go there and be free to kind of publish the books that they wanted to publish and tell the stories that they wanted to tell. And now you have the original 6 creators who founded the company on that premise dropping a book for, basically wanting to do exactly what they said the whole purpose of this company was, to publish a story that they would have otherwise not been able to publish through Marvel or DC and tell it the way that they wanted to tell it. And it is kind of weird, especially looking back at it through the lens of history and knowing where Image Comics is today in the future, 30 plus years later, and to see how many stories are published through Image that have nothing to do with superheroes whatsoever. And, some of them being incredibly successful, such as The Walking Dead. There's no superheroes whatsoever in Walking Dead. And that was, one of the most successful books that Image ever published. So it is kind of just strange that they would have tried to pigeonhole, other creators into working on this big overarching superhero universe that ultimately didn't even pan out. It's just, I found that really interesting. And like I said, I do kind of agree with the reader in his take on it being kind of a scummy thing to do on their part. On the next page, we get some fan art, this time printed in color. I believe this is actually the first time any fan art was printed in color in a Spawn book, possibly any of the Image books. We get one here of the funeral proceedings at Al Simmons' grave as we see Spawn look on from the horizon. We then see one of Overkill standing over Spawn as, kind of a depiction of their first encounter. This one just of Spawn kind of hanging off the ledge of a New York skyscraper. And this one, which is kind of joking, of Spawn as a Canadian, basically, where he has the little maple leaves here on his cloak instead of the skulls, and he's wearing a beanie and, kind of says, take off, eh? Like, I think that's kind of funny, kind of paying tribute to Todd's Canadian heritage. And on the next page, we see an advertisement for Wetworks. If you'd like to know more about Wetworks, feel free to check out my video on Wetworks #1. On the last page of the book, we see this advertisement for Comic Fest 93, where there was supposed to be, I guess, some sort of showdown or debate between Peter David and Todd McFarlane. I don't really know what all this was about. I don't know if it was just, they were joking around having it portrayed this way, or if there was actual beef between the two of them. If you do know anything about this, feel free to talk about it in the comments section. I'd actually like to know more about it. But it's all being presented as like this big showdown between the two of them. And on the reverse inside cover, we see a blurb of how Morrison and Capullo will be taking over Spawn and writing and drawing Spawn for a few issues while Todd McFarlane steps away to work on the Spawn Batman crossover. We will get to the Spawn Batman crossover at some point or another. I have it. However, this was actually supposed to just be a temporary thing. And looking back at it from the future, we know now that this actually was where Greg Capullo started his very long run as the primary artist on Spawn with number 16, and I believe going uninterrupted all the way until issue 100. And that was Spawn number 14. Overall, I thought the story was really good in this book. It did a really good job of kind of bringing us back into the mainline plot after, going off on a lot of tangents for a lot of issues, dealing with a lot of, side plots that involved Al Simmons, also dealing with, some of the issues where Todd wasn't the one writing them, and just kind of tied everything back together and got us back on course in progressing the main narrative of this story. The only real criticism I have, like I said earlier, it's very apparent the pages that Todd was just trying to crank out to get done in time for publication. And, this is something that we've seen in several other issues as well, kind of illustrating the fact that Todd was spread pretty thin at this point between trying to, essentially storyboard, Spawn, do all of the pencil work, do all of the inking in some cases, trying to also deal with, running a brand new comic company with other people. And I don't know if 93 is when he would have been starting on trying to found McFarlane Toys, which was initially called Todd Toys. I don't know if he was getting into the early stages of that yet or not, but if he was, that's just one more thing. Plus, he's, taking time away from his main book so that he can do a crossover book with one of DC's characters. The guy was getting pulled in a million and one directions. Oh, and did I forget to mention the part where he was also newly married and had a infant child at home to take care of, and trying to make all the public appearances? He was really in a point where he was getting pulled in a million and one directions, which I believe is why he just decided to make Greg Capullo the primary artist after he was done with the Spawn Batman crossover, as he realized that it just wasn't feasible for him to be able to do all of the things that he was trying to do while also drawing a monthly book cover to cover. And honestly, I think we ended up being the benefactors of that. Greg Capullo's artwork is amazing, as we're going to see going forward. And, Greg, took a lot of artistic chances with Spawn that Todd may not have. And I believe, by and large, they all worked out for the best. But we'll get into that in the future when we get to those issues. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.